Can you hear me? Yep. Wonderful. Thank you in the back there. Yeah, when we built that social graph, the biggest graph on the planet was 1,000 nodes. By the time I was done with it, before Reid Hoffman beat us at the game, we had 35 million nodes in the graph. And what you drew up there actually is at the very underpinnings of social networks, which is an affinity relationship. When you have an affinity for something, it turns out the graph folds on itself and it becomes much closer to get to the edge of the graph. But that's a whole different part of my life. First of all, I wanted to thank Ashima, Ravi, and Satish, who probably is not here, for inviting me to speak. My marketing team was looking at the invitation. They couldn't figure out why I was enthusiastic to be here today. And I told them, well, I feel like IIM is a part of my family, even though I've never studied there, for two reasons. One, my sister attended IIM Bangalore. I think she graduated class of 1980. I don't know if any of you there from that batch. Nope. Okay, the point in time it was on 1980.
Oh, 80.
Yeah, and it was on Double Road in Bangalore, the original building, before it went to the beautiful campus in Pinnacle. And I actually was fortunate to be admitted to the IIMs and chose not to take it at that point in time, so I feel like I could just as much have been one of you. Today I thought I'd take you down a journey that started 110 years ago, 110 and a half years ago, because the first Model T rolled off the plant in River Rouge plant in 1908, thanks to Mr. Henry Ford. And the world has changed ever since then. This notion of a production line has become the underpinning of most everything we think about, a notion of a business process. Think about how you vertically integrate a plant, how do you get efficiencies into systems, and at the end of the day, how do you deliver beautiful products that people want to use, right? So that's at the very center of all of this. And I'm going to share this perspective from that of a small little startup sitting here in Silicon Valley, where we believe we're sitting on the edge of something big and different. And I'm going to sort of give you a sense of what does it mean to be a native AI company. So AI, of course, every company claims that AI. In my mind, a native AI company is one that would never exist if AI was not possible. And for us, as you'll see in a few minutes, we would not be in, the company just wouldn't be there without that. So I'm going to start with a little picture. So I'm going to ask you folks, it's post-lunch, I thought we'd get this energy going. What do you see there? A ship, okay. A boat? Anything else?
Cockroach.
Cockroach, okay, good.
Oil rigs.
Oil rigs.
Oil rig, yep.
Copper rods.
Copper rods, okay. So well, it turns out it's the Sutro Tower in San Francisco. And you've got the coastal fog rolling in.
Oh, wow.
And when you see things, context matters, right? And when you think about where the world is, where we're going from a paucity of data to a plethora of data, you got the context around you that really helps you interpret what you're looking at. And so in the absence of that, and now actually you go Google this thing and look at the picture, you'll see three beautiful posts on which this gorgeous tower is. And if you live in San Francisco, all your television feeds come off that tower. So the reason I put that up there is because that's the kind of world we live in today. Now I just thought I'd take a little sidebar, tell you a little bit about Drishti, and then jump into the core of my story. So as I said, we're a Palo Alto company. We're unusual in that all of our engineering sits in Bangalore. Most companies tend to offshore their engineering. My CTO co-founder, Krishnendu, who's what do you call him, Zoogler or whatever, ex-Googler or whatever, lives in Bangalore. And this audience knows what Drishti means, so I'm going to pass on that. Essentially what we are is a company that looks at video streams, and we pull information from a video stream. So let me give you a little context of that. So Google, the building we're in right now, came to be in large part because they could take documents and figure out information in a document and rank it so we could find it. If you look at companies like Nuance, Siri, where I spent a year at SRI, they start trying to parse audio signals and in real time figure out what the spoken word is. I met Paris Hilton in the Paris Hilton. It's a pretty hard sentence to parse. If you take the analog of that in the video world, over the last 5 years, we have self-driving cars because when we look at a single frame, And from that frame, you can decide where the stop sign is, whether there's a human being, there's a bicyclist, there's a white line. What we are doing is the analog of what Siri and all of these other devices do, understand in real time what the video stream is telling you. It's an extremely hard problem, as you can imagine. And that's the very core of our own technology. Like I said, we wouldn't be in existence if we couldn't have made that possible. What do we use it for? I'll show you a little bit more a little later on, but quite simply, we try and understand what human beings on the line are doing. Because for over 70 years now, all of manufacturing has been blind to what happens there. All the $1 billion that our angel investor here and a few other friends have put money into is studying machines. But it turns out machines are 10 to 30% of what happens on the floor. It's us human beings who are actually there in large numbers. Foxconn plant has 500,000 people in the plant. And something like 68%, as I'll show you in a few minutes, of all the errors, the defects, are because of us. And every plant manager is blind to that. And that's the light, the Sutro tower that Drishti is trying to make happen. Okay? I won't talk much about the company, but let's talk about data and what's going on in the world. So some of you probably work for Oracle, SAP, one of these enterprise companies. And 40 years ago, in the early 1980s, what happened was we took we took a 100-year-old area called accounting, double entry bookkeeping, some of you might be accountants, and the new technology called relational database, and married them and created a new data set called the accounting or the finance, right? And what they quickly realized was they were cutting checks to their employees, so HR became possible. They were cutting checks to their supply chain, so supply chain management became possible. And they were getting checks from a bunch of customers, so CRM became possible. So literally from that single new data set called accounting information, financials, you had entire large companies coming to be. So if you watch how that transpired over the years, we've only been adding more data to that core data set. Okay, now I know that the ship is, steaming out of Shanghai on its way to the US. Weather in the middle slows it down. I know my delivery is off. Yeah, but the basic problem is still the same. It's a supply chain problem. What's happening now is that we're in a place where we're able to create new data sets. So let me give you an example or two. Think about fake news. It's very popular these days. Fake news may have existed in the past, but it wasn't really that interesting, wasn't that at scale. But now it becomes possible, hopefully the guys at Facebook are figuring this out and a few other companies, it's becoming possible to A, generate the fake news, and B, try and analyze it and try and prevent it. Now that's a data set that didn't exist ever before. There are lots of implications of these kinds of data sets. You can change entire history by bringing a president in who should or should not be the president. You can see all of that happening in the Indian political system as India goes to vote right now. So it creates opportunities for people and players. It also creates risk for all of us. And so all of this is possible because machines are able to process information at a rate never possible before. Because you go back to the ERP world, the data is all human created. There's only a certain pace at which humans can create the data, and there's only a certain pace at which actions happen in the real world. So where we sit is squarely in that world where this data is now possible because of three trends we all know about. AI, deep learning, GPUs, and cheap storage. And for me, 3 years ago, when I was sitting in my study at home, sorting out what I wanted to build, I sort of read up a lot about deep learning. I couldn't get my head around this notion of somehow a computer would learn. It just seemed abstract and made no sense to me. And then after I spent a year trying to get computer vision to work on a video stream, it became crystal clear that the world of software 1.0, what Andrew Karpathy at Tesla calls software 1.0, or where you build feature sets up in a logical, programmatic way, actually doesn't scale. And what neural networks really do for us is let us go in a different direction and do much of this really by driving the product from data, not from logic and software. And till we actually started working on this, and I started seeing the results, it made no sense to me. And I suspect many of you on that journey asking yourselves this question, okay, is this real? in what's going on, and I can assure you standing here that it is very real. And again, without that leftmost box, Drishti wouldn't be around today. I think the rest of it is fairly clear. I think we all live in a point in time when we're very lucky to have these kinds of things happen. So with that, let's talk about the world I live in. And I'm going to use my cell phone here. So all of us have some form of the cell phone in the pocket. So here's the quiz question now. If you imagine the final assembly line, where you got Gorilla Glass, speaker, buttons, what have you, metal on the back, and the other end of that assembly line comes out a beautiful phone. So my quiz question, and Apurva is not going to answer because he heard it 3 years ago when I was pitching my investors. The quiz question is, how many robots and how many human beings put this phone together? Final assembly, parts at one end, beautiful phone at the other. How many robots, how many people? Any guesses?
250.
250 what?
250 together.
Okay, break it up for me.
200 robots and 50 humans.
Okay, 250, 200/50. Any other takers?
201.
Okay, 201.
100 bots, 500 people.
100 bots and 5 people.
500.
500, okay, 100 and 500, okay? Any other takers? Okay?
One row.
One robot, I love that. Okay, how many people? 3 people, okay. So I'm going to cut to the chase. Answer as of a couple of years ago when Apple last released public information, 141 people and 0 robots. Yeah, so the public press would like you to believe that robots have taken over the world, and that's far, far from true. All you need to do is go and listen to Mr. Elon Musk, who tweeted very famously that people are underrated because he tried to build a lights out factory, had his head handed to him, built an entire tent factory beside his real factory to build a car with human beings, right? So some of you might be industrial engineers, and the best way we've got to know about what a human being does on the line for 110 years has been a stopwatch. Today you may use your cell phone as a stopwatch, but it's still a stopwatch. Guess what happens? When I show up on the line, I have enough time to maybe take 10 measurements. And of those measurements, guess what? If I'm measuring you doing your work, what are you going to do? You're going to game me. You either go faster or you're going to go slower. Right? So you got small data set, distorted behavior, billion-dollar investment behind that because guess what? All the math of the line is based on that wrong number. Right? That's the problem statement we're going after. And what we do, just to give you a quick sense, is we watch the guy on the floor doing the job. And we automatically extract from that information in terms of what he's doing. We know when the cycle starts, we know when the cycle ends, we know when he's turning 4 screws, we know if he's forgotten if he's turned the 4th screw. And this just has the opportunity, we believe, to change how manufacturing is done. So that's the core Drishti storyline. I'll skip the details of all of that, but I think what's interesting in this is the 3 questions that became very interesting to us as we were putting all of this together, and we worked with A.T. Kearney, some of you might work for A.T. Kearney, to ask these questions. Who contributes more? The human or the machine? Now, if it's a human being, what kind of data do we have on the human being? And what value can you derive by understanding what the human being is doing? So, it turns out, as I said, according to us, 72% of factory jobs are performed by human beings. Our friends over in Boston Consulting had a report out 2 years ago, 3 years ago maybe now, where they said 90% of manufacturing is manual. So it's somewhere between 70 and 90, just in huge, huge numbers. What is that? Oh, it's a phone, okay. I thought you were trying to tell me to get moving. So you can see what's going on here with Foxconn. Foxconn makes this grand announcement, 1 million robots by 2012. 4 years later, they got 40,000 robots, right? Just very, very hard to get robots in. And if you look at the sheer numbers, there are about 350 million people in manufacturing around the world. And you have 1.5 million robots on the planet. 1.5 million. Right? And you assume, as it's been shown, typically a robot replaces 6 people, you got a penetration of 0.4%. So it's going to be 100 years before robots take over, even though people be shudder, that's what I'm going to tell you, it's going to be 100 years before all of us are out of jobs. So you don't need to worry about that. Now the question is, okay, what happens when the human being is involved? It turns out 70% of variability. Variability is the biggest issue in manufacturing, right? If you have variability, now you have no control on your process. Those of you statistical, in anything in statistics will quickly understand that. And as I said earlier, 68% of defects are caused by people. Now, so how do we get data? It turns out all of us go to IIT or IIM and wherever else, we get fancy degrees as engineers. We show up on the shop floor wanting to do something fancy with constrained optimization, but turns out 1/3 of our time is actually spent trying to get data. 1/3 is actually trying to figure out what's going on, only 1/3 is spent solving problems. So it's an extremely inefficient process. And when you talk to the plant folks in manufacturing, it's starting, they basically say we need help in all of these business processes. If you can just get data, we can sort out what's going on in our world. Whether it's trying to figure out 10 guys show up to be on a line, where do we put these 10 guys? They don't know. What if I could actually tell you that I have pudgy fingers, you should not give me a fine motor task. Quality will just go up, time will shrink. It's just at that level of detail, talking about personalization in a completely different world, that's what we're talking about here. Okay, so now that you understand the world I live in, I want to talk a little bit about what is having all this data. I mean, we generate hundreds of thousands of data points where previously you only had 10 data points, right? So suddenly now you've gone from this world where you do not understand, you were looking at that and think it's a boat or a copper tower or whatever, to suddenly now know the Sutro tower is there, what do you do with it? It turns out that there are 3 things that really happen and matter. Company culture. It's very interesting to see what this does. And I'll talk a little bit business process. You got 10,000 data points, changes how you look at the world. And importantly, there are very few people in companies who know what to do with the data, right? So it is shocking how little people know about statistics, as a simple example. So let's start with the first one. You suddenly realize that you have people in the job who know how to do it one way, and they've been taught that way in school, have not seen anything else. And they suddenly start saying, what is this data? And they feel very threatened. The data now becomes universally available. So when we go into a plant and put the data up, the guy, the CEO of the company sitting 10,000 miles away knows exactly what's happening in the facility that he had no clue about before. In fact, the plant manager who sits in the building has much better sense. And even more interesting, you tend to put the process engineer right beside the line, because the belief is he will know more or she will know more by sitting 10 feet away. We know more about that line than even that person sitting 10 feet away because of the kind of data we're pulling together. So what we've observed is that the first thing that happens is people will sort of dismiss the data, because in their cognitive sense they don't know what it means. So quite simply we walk in and we say, okay, here's the mean and here's the variance of a given station on the line. Like, what's variance? I only know 10 data samples, variance doesn't make any sense. I only know the mean, right? So they can compare mean to mean, but they don't understand, okay, now statistically can I tell because of t-test or something I can separate the means by? No clue. And then their immediate reaction is to dismiss you because they can't comprehend you, right? So I think all of us have to get used to this idea that when we come in with new data sets, start putting products out there, we've got to think about the acceptance, the understanding, and then the acceptance, the interpretation and acceptance of this data. The other thing that happens is that you have to start thinking about new workflows, right? So as an example, in the plants we work, one of the examples is they've got 8 industrial engineers who do Kaizen, I suspect. All of you know the word, Japanese word Kaizen, it's continuous improvement. And they've got 154 line supervisors running these plants. And the 8 industrial engineers can do 4 Kaizen events a year. So you essentially get 32 shots at fixing the plant every year. Now with the kind of data we're putting together, and the volume we're putting it together, the open question on the table is, can these 154 guys behave like those 8 guys? Right? Because they don't need to understand the math of it, because a system will guide them to an answer. So now it becomes, okay, how do you empower them? How do you let them take control? How do you let them do A/B tests on the floor? And if you can do 154 times 4 A/B tests all day long, what does that mean to the efficiency of the facility, right? Which means now you need to let them run those A/B tests, send a signal back to the industrial engineers. Hey, this seems like a good thing. Do I have your approval? Can I make this a permanent thing? And not only do I make it permanent on my line, how about taking it to the 9 other lines that are building the same product? How do you drive change across a facility? Which means you have to think about new workflows, and the onus is on us as creators of the data to enable that to happen. Interpretation of data is actually a very interesting problem. So if you think about the idea, a simple problem, taking a screwdriver, taking the screw, and turning the screw. When we started analyzing our data, we made this naive assumption that it was a Gaussian, it was a uniform, a normal distribution. And then when we started interpreting it, we found it was making no sense to us. Till one of my colleagues realized, wait a second, we have a very simple physics problem here. There's a limit, there's a lower limit to how fast you can do it, right? You grab the screwdriver, grab a screw, and 8 turns, however fast that goes is the lower bound. But there's no limit in the upper end, because I might be waiting for a part, I might go talk to my buddy next to me. So it's a long tail distribution that you're dealing with. So once you realize there's a long tail distribution, you start thinking about the problem completely differently. Your analysis changes, the result interpretation changes. So number one, that is our own maturing to understand what the data means. But number two, imagine trying to tell the guy, the line supervisor, who's probably never seen any of this stuff, explaining to him. So what we started doing is we actually subsume all of the data, we hide it from them. There's a very sophisticated engine running. And I use the example of a car and my wife. Very bright woman, she will tell you all about cancer drugs, but doesn't understand a car, one end of a car from the other. But what she does care about is it safe, does it look pretty, and most importantly, will her cell phone talk to the Bluetooth in that car so she can actually make calls to her son as she's driving, right? Engine, who cares? It doesn't matter. And so that's sort of part of what we're also doing is subsuming the complexity, sophistication of our computer vision system, hiding it, and only exposing the relevant parts of what's going on, and hiding even the mathematics for all these people. So where does that take us? It takes us to the Golden State Warriors. So these guys, in 2009-ish, the owner's son graduated from Stanford. They shipped him off to Santa Cruz. They had a lower division basketball team running in Santa Cruz. And they told him, go figure out Moneyball in Santa Cruz. And so this guy, Kurt, goes off and starts applying mathematics to the problem. So they actually put 6 cameras up on the basketball arena. And they start tinkering with it. So one of the things they're looking for is what's the expected position value of a player on the field, on the court at any instant in time. Because at the end of the day, what you care about is can he drop the ball into the net to give you an extra point to beat the opposition. And they create these extensive models with a very simple question. I want to win the game. That's the value they're looking for. And when they come out on the field, if you actually look at the Golden State Warriors, statistically in the third quarter, they blow past the opposition. And the reason they blow past the opposition is that in the halftime, 15-minute halftime, so let me reset. During the first half, they have a video coaching team that's pulling video all the time. And they edit the video by the time the team shows up in the locker room at halftime. Of the 15 minutes of the halftime, 2 minutes are spent just silently playing video. And the video shows the best moves that they made against the opposition. No commentary, nothing. And what they're really passing to the team is, if you make these plays, you will make your points. And that's the reason they can come in and blow past everybody in the third quarter, and Steve Curry doesn't need to play the fourth quarter, right? So that's what's going on in all of this process, is you're using mathematics, using video data just like we are, to sort out what's happening on the floor to win. And they're changing their business processes, how they play past the ball, who comes onto the court, when do they come on, all of this based on video data. So for us, what does that mean? So take the simple notion of Kaizen I talked about. It turns out every time you do a Kaizen event, historically in the best Japanese companies, you tend to have a 20% drop in efficiency when you make a Kaizen event because the new process needs to be learned by people. So people take time to adapt, you tinker with it, and what we found is that because of the volume of data we're able to give them, they're actually able to make better decisions even before they show up on the floor to make a change. So you really have a benefit from day one. So which really means the lost productivity that we're talking about, but oftentimes it will be 2 weeks before you can catch up, before you even cross over and do better. That efficiency is there for you right off the bat. And that's because you can deconstruct what happened on the court, what happened in the line, and make efficient decisions before the fact. That's the kind of change I think we're looking at with that very, very sophisticated understanding on the floor that's going to drive much of what happens. And I think it's going to be far broader than just in the manufacturing world that I'm talking about. Much of what I've said can be applied anywhere, to any place where people are. And you will see more and more of that happening. You know, today London is the most videotaped city on the planet, right? You will see all of this coming into our daily workflows and going from there. So I'm going to sort of take questions here. I hope this is of some interest to you. Yep. There is a question.
So fascinating use case of AI data. Just curious, a long time back I had read about Gilbert's and their time and motion study.
Yeah.
And how they really use the technology in the 30s or whatever 20s was more like they used TV camera and try to manually interpret, improve the whole manufacturing process. So how do those two dots connect?
Yeah. Beautiful question. The question that was asked up front is, you had Frederick Taylor and Frank and Lillian Gilbreth, who were the pioneers along with Henry Ford of what's called time and motion studies. And the question that was asked was, they used tools back in the day, and how do those tools marry up with what we do today? So it turns out that the reason they were able to do their work at that time was Kodak came out with the first movie camera. And they would take this big giant clock and put it beside you as you did your work, because the movie camera would record the time on it as you went about it, and then they would have post-facto actually by hand extract information. So there are two threads. Conceptually, there is no difference. Time and motion studies give you a level of insight that still is the same. I think the difference comes in that the vocabulary that we talk about has dramatically changed. So if you go back and look at it, the Gilbreths created what they call Terblics. A Terblic is Gilbreth backward. And they basically said in a plant there are 18 elemental actions. We believe today with the kind of resolution we can break these actions into, maybe in the thousands. But it's still finite, which actually makes this problem very tractable. We're not dealing with the wild out there like a car driving on the street has to deal with. We live with a very limited vocabulary, and as long as you can solve problems in the limited vocabulary, the state machine can run, all goodness happens. So I would argue nothing has changed. It is the level of sophistication, the level of granularity of the data that is really different. And most importantly, I think what's happened is that lean manufacturing has established principles to actually use the data. In fact, think about lean itself. One of the biggest problems that lean has is it has no data. They're very smart about how they use sparse data, but they don't have data. So some of the customers we worked with, I tell the plant manager that how do you want to give your entire staff Friday off? Right? So this is the kind of impact it can have. It's not basis point changes, this is like percentage point changes. And there's just so much fat in this whole thing, it is hard to believe. Yeah. Yes, a question here.
A very fascinating overview. Thank you so much. A quick question. Again, as you have, in lean manufacturing or just in time, they have tried to improve efficiency on the part, the parts or the part process. In terms of fixed assets itself, how do you see? The robots or the assembly lines itself, which are pretty static.
Mm-hmm.
You can't move around assembly lines as easily as you could move around, distribution boxes or things like that, inventory boxes. And
correct. So
like
your question is?
How do you see this making
applying to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. So the question is, how do you think about using our we call it action recognition. So that's the way to think. Object recognition is the traditional computer vision problem. We call it action recognition because we're trying to figure out actions. So it's fascinating. Almost every customer we go to, after seeing what we do, the first question they ask us is that. So there are two areas that are particularly relevant to what we're talking about. The first thing they're trying to sort out are so robots, as you well know, are within a cage, they do what they do. But even industrial equipment has failures. So if you think about it, not a big robot called a packing machine, where you make 10,000 cans of Ensure in an hour or whatever, it turns out those machines fail. And when they fail, you have $150,000 outage cost to fix it and put it back on the road, right? It turns out that they actually have a Pareto of what typically fails. And what they're looking for is the ability for us to find the action of something like a bushing somewhere beginning to fall apart. So the quick answer to your question is actually very relevant. It may not be pure time and motion studies, but actually we talk about two things. We talk about productivity, which is time and motion studies. We actually talk about quality as well. I'm not quite showing you the videos and all that, but think of Waze driving you home. So what we do is we actually in real time tell the operator whether he's making a mistake or not, right? So there's a whole quality element to which I just skipped past in the presentation. And I think there's a huge element there where when we have cobots working with people, it has a huge role. So we've chosen not to go there yet. We've got to focus as a small company, but there's plenty to be done. Yes?
What are the applications of this to prevent shoplifting, surveillance, all that fun stuff?
Yeah. So you remember I framed it up as, so the question is what's the application to shoplifting and what do they call it, asset lossage or something? Sorry? Thank you, pilferage, yes. You notice I framed the problem up almost in a side note as people at work. So some people are at work there trying to steal stuff. What we are doing is actually very broadly applicable. Now the question is, to make these systems work, you need enough data of people pilfering to actually run your recognizers at a high enough rate. That's not a problem. Again, it's a focus issue. The most repeatable data on the planet comes off the manufacturing line. And really what we're doing is we're continuously improving our recognition systems, our neural network. We have our own networks designed to do this with that kind of data. Hopefully we'll be big enough one day where we'll come after shoplifting and all of these other use cases, but we're just starting out where we are. Yes, sir.
What is so you touched on, you sort of alluded to this in some of your slides in terms of resistance to it broadly. What are the resistance bottlenecks that you see from the labor unions, from the actual folks who are organizing for the manufacturing?
Yeah. So when I asked you the question, how many people and how many robots made this? Many of you believe that robots actually made this, right? It turns out the unions live in this mortal fear of robots taking over their workforce. And our commentary to the unions, quite simply, is we are increasing the bar. In other words, we're improving the effectiveness of this workforce. And in doing so, the bar for an ROI model to be run on a robot just got lifted. And interestingly, I was talking to a Swedish delegation coming through. I did not know that the head of the labor union was sitting in the audience. And this question came up and I said, I actually think I'm protecting jobs. And he raised his hand and said, I welcome you to Sweden. And I'm like, okay, why? What were you welcoming me to Sweden? And then he looked at me, I was slightly perplexed. He said, oh, I'm actually the head of the labor union in Sweden. And I don't think the labor union is, at this point in time, aware enough of what we're doing and therefore appreciative. I'm actually biding my time till such time I have enough data to beyond any shadow of the doubt establish the implications of what we're doing. And then I guess I'll make a trip to Washington to meet the labor unions to sort this out. We're having the first connections now with one of the biggest unionized companies on the planet, and we'll see where that goes.
Sir,
Yes.
Hazura Singh here from IIM 93 batch. You talked about time and motion studies, right? I mean, now the days are that people are shifting towards teams rather than individual actions. And you talked about lean, so flow-based system where WIP limits are applied, prioritization is happening. Are you going in the direction to use the data sets because reducing batch size and making intelligent decision on WIP limits, including DevOps and other areas? Just would like to have your thoughts on that.
Yeah. There have been companies that have taken passes at using keystrokes and such like to try and analyze this. There's no reason why the fundamental, so what we're in the process of doing is revisiting all the fundamental mathematical concepts of lean, which, as I said earlier, were very wisely broken down to something simple. I don't see why we can't take the same principles and apply them in a software environment. The only question there is there's no threat to the coder, right? I mean, there's no robot that's hanging over his or her head. So the question is, okay, what's the human reaction to it? I have not studied that market. I don't have a feel for it. But I don't see sitting standing here why it can be done.
Why I'm mentioning is because 70% of Fortune 500 are moving on to business agility. And business agility is based on decentralized decision making, moving away from command and control where individuals are not emphasized but the teams.
Yep.
And that's the direction that we're going. That's why I asked.
Yeah. There's no reason why you can't go down that path. Well, I would expect that. Yes.
Yeah, Prasad. My name is Akella. I am Bangalore 2005. The question is two-part. First part is more to do with the analogy you gave the painting of the session when you talked about the phone and the fact that it was all assembled by humans. Right? I haven't seen the shop floor for iPhone or Tesla, but I have seen the videos on YouTube. So is it the technological limitation or is it the cost-benefit reason why humans are there in Taiwan versus machines here in Fremont, which is doing the test and assembly, right? That's the first part. Now, depending on your response on the first part, I have another related
Absolutely, absolutely. So the core question he's asking is why is it that the penetration of humans is only 0.4% is really what he's going after. It turns out, so many years ago in my life, I used to spend summers in GM's plants on the floor. And we would go in, we would take $1 billion plant down for 6 months to retool the plant. So retooling basically meant you would strip the whole plant, you put equipment in, you put the robots in, you would manually reprogram all these robots so you can actually build a new car, right? The iPhone has a cycle that's 9 months. And there's a huge pre-build because you have to meet all the demand and everybody shows up in the store. Now, what that really means is you don't have that time, the luxury of time to go back and actually reprogram these lines. So there's a business problem sitting number one there. The second problem you got is there aren't enough guys on the planet who know how to program these robots. It sounds very strange, and the art of programming robots is very arcane. You stand with a pendant and you literally move the arm around and you hit a button saying, remember this point. It's as arcane as that. And so the tools don't exist. So it's almost like in the days before you had an IDE, you had to debug literally line by line. All those, the tooling just doesn't exist, right? So the third is the programmability of the human being is stunningly high. You can pull a group of 10 people in and you say, guys, I'm going from making an electric fan to an electric skillet. This happens all the time in China. And this is the process. Go and do it. What happens? All of us know. We know what a skillet looks like. We assemble 3 times. I get the general drift. I can start making skillets now, right? So that's the core problem that we've got, is that it's a sophisticated problem, not enough people and not enough robots, and so we just have a capacity problem.
Right, so this essentially boils down to the first cycle and reprogramming, right?
Yep.
I mean, the trade-off. And if you take the context of nearshoring manufacturing in the United States, then you look at heavy equipment, so even cars, Model 3, right, for that matter, the first cycle is not like an iPhone. And assuming it's going to be robots which do most of the manufacturing, your technology of action recognition or computer vision Can it be applied for predictive maintenance of machines?
Yes, yes. So quite simple. Think about a robot arm which is designed to be very repeatable, right? So it will go and do whatever you ask it to do. Now as that motor starts failing or the gear starts failing, they actually start seeing drift in it. And it's not always possible for the robot from its own joint sensors to tell what's going on. A third external sensor that can actually watch the motion of this and look for deviations can very quickly tell you, is this thing doing what it's supposed to do or not? And it's actually very possible to do that. It's not really no different than a human being picking up a screw and placing it somewhere and turning it. It's the same thing. The motion, there's variability. You do it differently than I do. But at its core, we can figure out what's going on and what's different about it, and we can do that. We've not chosen to do that right now, as I said, just to focus on a wide open space, but there's no reason why we can't do that.
We did it through vibration analysis. So
Yep.
short vision, we're looking for vibrations from the machine and then predict when.
Absolutely, yeah, there's different signals. I mean, your gearing changes, you have vibration introduced because the gear is not running correctly, you can pick it up, absolutely. Yes?
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
So where do you think the 0.4% goes in next 10 years? What's the range you are thinking? Maybe with or without yours or similar technology?
Interesting question. Give me a second to think that through. I can tell you where it's not going to go. And then I'll sort out in my head where it's going to go.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah. So the question being asked is, where do I see the penetration of robots, and where does that 0.4% displacement term come from? So in other words, where are we going to start displacing people? I think where we will start displacing people is where the tasks are, number one, fairly steady. So there's some horizon on which you can look at it and you don't need to really massively change what's going on. Number two, it is either unsafe in some form or it's very distasteful. And number three, the cost of an error is very high, right? So if you think about in the pharmaceutical business, you're trying to take the active ingredient, you're taking the inactive ingredient, you're trying to mix these. So you actually take big pots, you pour one into the other. And you can't leave any active ingredient behind because that means the efficacy of that medication is not what it needs to be, right? That's the kind of place where the cost of an error is so high that you will see a lot of investment in automation, where people are going to get hurt because OSHA comes after them, and things of that sort, where you will see the displacement continue to happen. Where you will probably not see it is where you can find where it's either very hard to actually put that together without human intelligence and dexterity. It's probably the most common case where you will not see it happen. Turns out even assembling a 3-level server is a fairly hard problem, right? And one would think it seems so obvious and easy to do, but it's very hard for a machine to actually understand the imagery coming off of the first floor being built, the second floor being built, and the third floor, and trying to automate that. So I think you will see that's where the challenges lie, and where their fast product turnovers will be the last ones to get automated. Yes, please.
Yeah, let's say your business does really well, and 10 years down the line, you have continuous drishti and pervasive drishti.
Yep.
So how do people, in a large factory where you have 500,000 people working, and each one is being monitored by your device, how do they feel that they're continuously being computer vision, their actions are being monitored? So what's psychological angle to that?
Yeah, I hope I have 20/20 vision, but we'll let that fly for now. So it turns out in the plant, those of you in manufacturing know there's something called poka-yoke. Yeah, poka-yoke is a Japanese word that basically says you idiot-proof your lines. And essentially what you do is you actually instrument it using light curtains and such like, in a very Rube Goldberg type style. You hack all this together, slap it in there, to even today measure what the human being is doing. So it's happening today. And the minute you present this not as I'm not interested in what the human being is doing, I'm interested in what is being done in the process.
Right.
So one of the most important things we do is we actually go back and show people video of what we're doing. I remember at midnight one night in one of our customers here in the Bay Area, This lady comes up to me in the break and says, how's my hair looking today? I'm like, why is she worried about her hair? And then it occurred to me, she thinks I'm watching her hairstyle. And so, you know what, I really don't care about your hair. Would you like to see the video? I said, yeah, come on over. And so I showed her, and she didn't see her hair anywhere, she saw her hands. Right? So the minute she realized, oh, you don't care about my head or anything of that sort, you're only looking at what I'm doing with my fingers, the attitude changed after that. She said, oh, okay, I get it now. And then she says, you're doing nothing different than that other machine there. I said, exactly. So we are an intelligent digital version of that other machine you used for 10 years now. We're just a smarter version of that. And guess what? All those 8 systems you have there, one day I'll replace them all for you and there'll be one system running. So that's sort of the way people have to look at it. That's what we're trying to present it. You had a question? I'll get your mic, yeah.
No, I think I wanted to add to the robot thing. I think it because a lot of people ask that question. I think the bigger thing to think about is even if robots don't replace, the processes will be more assisted with robots. And I think when we talk about some of the finance things, we will, how we are workflows in finance, upgrading and robotic assistant is allowing that. So that the penetration of robotic assistants will probably improve significantly in the next few years.
Yeah, if I can riff off that idea, so my entire life has been built, you probably noticed when I put my bio up there, it's about man-machine systems. So 20 years ago, I was looking at robotic systems, one second, and the question was on the line, you were picking a battery up 1 minute, you were picking up a 150-pound cockpit, you know, what you put through your door opening, and the computer scientists in you will know this, the piano mover's problem. The piano mover's problem is how do you get this big object that doesn't just directly fit through the door, how do you do this 6-dimensional gyration to get it through the door? And people would break their backs doing that. And what we did was we took a robotic system, gave it a haptic sensor, and basically took the bulk of the weight, the load, if you will, of that 150-pound cockpit off this person. And all he or she had to do was to push it and drive it in. So the cognition of the human being and the power of the robot is what we built. Today what we're doing is we're inverting the problem. We're taking the cognition of the AI system and we're taking the dexterity of the human being and marry them. And I think fundamentally what's going to happen is when you look at these AI companies, you're going to actually find that AI is not 100% correct. And what you have to do is you have to find the best way to take the best of the man and the best of the machine, marry them, and that's when you get disproportionate outputs coming, right? So I'm actually not surprised by the comment. I think every industry as you look, you will start seeing this pattern of people getting smart about understanding the limitations of each system, understanding the capabilities of each and trying to marry them up so that you get the most. Question?
A lot of what you've talked about, again in context of what the gentleman asked, was about mechanical robots.
Yep.
Right? There's a whole category of software robots that we talked about, particularly displacing white-collar jobs. Right? So do you think that same trend is going to happen there too, or is that going to be different?
Yeah, I think there's the same question that came off on the left side here earlier, where it is going to happen. I think the question here is in the context of keystrokes and knowing what people are doing. That's about as close to a white-collar job as you can get. You will see the same thing happening. So I'll give you a little example of where white-collar job will change. One of the prospects that reached out to me basically dialed me in to the pharmacy not very far from here. And the question on the table was, so as we were dialing into the pharmacy, the pharmacist was dispensing tablets. So the question on the table was, okay, I've gone in, my child is sick, needs an antibiotic. The pharmacist's job is to dispense it. Remember I talked about the 68% error rate that human beings introduce. So what are the odds that the pharmacist actually gave an antibiotic, not an antipsychotic? Right? So I don't know if we're going to go to full displacement, but you will definitely see a mentor sitting on the pharmacist's shoulder and basically saying, you know what, that doesn't look like an antibiotic to me. You really don't want to double check your work. So that part I'm very confident about. The displacement in the software field or any white collar job, I think will occur in places where it's easily automatable. It's just a given. You're not going to stop that. And I think you're going to get with it and say, okay, there's some things that are going to get automated, but some are so hard they can't be. And I think the message I pass to my kids is find a job where the human touch is critical. Because the human touch is critical, you're not going to get automated away. Sorry.
Yeah. My name is Kaushik. My question is a little different. It's not tied to manufacturing, but the application of robotics to something around sustainability.
Around sustainability.
And environment.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the top problems that we are facing today is the waste management piece of it.
Is the what?
Waste management.
Waste management, thank you.
And in the waste management process, the biggest problem is we are dumping everything in the either recyclable, compost, and everything gets mixed, and then it ends up in a dump yard and then to the sea and the ocean. Now, one of the biggest challenges is to how to sort it in the right way so that recyclables can be recycled and the ones which needs to be going to dump those. And this is where today, China has stopped its dumping, so all the dumping is happening here, it's going to the ocean, plastic and all that stuff. Now, how can we use robotics to do something about this?
Yeah. So I actually spent 4 hours in the waste management plant up in San Francisco because they called me up and asked me this exact same question. I think there's two parts. So the problem that you have there is the variability of trash coming down your system. And robots are very good when you have repeatability and very bad when you have variability, right? So I think you will see different kinds of robots. A vibrator at one level is a kind of robot, right? It's a programmable device with some intelligence. And simply by changing the frequency at which you vibrate, you can actually filter out different items. You can change the sieve distance, different things fall through. I think you will see that kind of robotics going in there, not what you and I think of a traditional robot with an arm working. Now that said, there will still be situations where the robot will not know what to do with stuff and you will have human beings. And those kinds of jobs are not the most fun jobs. The area stinks to high heaven. And really, you only do that if you have no other choice. It turns out the immigrant workforce is always there because they give them good jobs, paying jobs if you don't know the language. So I think we will see more and more automation. There's a lot of automation in the waste plant. If you've been to one, it sounds like you're familiar with it. A lot of automation already. You will see much more automation, and then there'll be parts just remain manual. I think I'll take one last question, and I think I'm running out of my time. So, yes, back.
So thank you for beautiful presentation. The question I have is, my understanding is, you use computer vision, AI, deep learning, and all of that when there is like a lot of variables, like self-driving car kind of situations, right? But in this case, in a factory environment, everything is so well documented, and it's almost like, people are teaching, like you document it first, then teach people, then you are using computer vision to like learn the same thing back. Kind of, maybe I'm missing something, but could you please explain how that works?
Yeah, you're not missing anything. You actually got it right. It is actually pretty arcane, like I said, right? So today, just for everybody, the way it works is you have a standard work process. There's a document that lays out. A process engineer, often sitting 10,000 miles away, will write out a spec for somebody in China to go build, and you'll lay out the whole process step by step by step, and then it shows up on the shop floor. And this guy has missed some cultural nuance where somebody who does not want to get their hands dirty will wear a glove. And suddenly the entire process gets thrown out of the window because the glove and that process will not work. And that will get completely redone on the floor, right? So if you talk to the guy 10,000 miles away, he says, this is my process, everybody's following it. No, it's far from the truth. Something different is happening on the floor. And it often happens, and we call this the brilliant outlier when we think about the kind of work we do. We find that the creativity of the guy on the floor, today there's no measurement technique for that, right? So if there's a guy who actually finds a way to reduce the variability on the line for a particular process step, hey, there's no measurement. Because there's no measurement, there's no recognition, and there is no actual propagation of this improvement across all the lines in the world. So it turns out that today we continue with that old process till such time we actually will build a library that will tell you how to build that process. So if you think about CAD, you think of product, you actually take a bill of material and break it apart. Corresponding to that, think about the bill of process. And over time, I think we will have libraries that will actually tell you how do you build a product. Right? Because we've just seen 100 of these done around the world, and we can actually identify the best way to turn 4 screws to secure it. So you will see over time an inversion where that will happen. Sure, thank you. You will see an inversion over time where we will actually propose, you give me a product, we will tell you what the best way to build it is. I think that'll take us a few years to get there. We're not there yet. Yeah. Thank you all. I appreciate your time.